When the smoke clears, we're still standing.
Bulldog 3-3, Apache 8 November, fire for effect, over. Enemy OP on Hilltop, over.
When the smoke clears, we're still standing.
Welcome, everybody, to Everlasting Veteran. This is your host, Ryan Landry. I am joined today by Holly Higgins. I have the pleasure to be able to have her on my show and honor her, all Gold Star families, and her son, Daniel Johnson. I am so glad that you're on. Welcome, Holly.
Thank you, Ryan. I'm honored to be here.
So just let me know, like, kind of what got you into the hero's journey and what it means to you.
Well, I met Lieutenant Colonel retired Scott Mann in 2019 when I saw his play, Last Out, Elegy of a Green Beret, in its first tour, nationwide tour. And at that time, the play was only a 90-minute one-act play with 4 cast members, all combat veterans. And I was so moved. And he, by the way, is the founder of the Hero's Journey, just to tie those two together. I was so moved by that play. I just knew there was like an immediate connection between Scott and me. And it started the moment I met him. They brought me to meet him before the play, backstage, because they were dedicating that night to my son, Daniel. And I didn't even know that when I walked in. There was no person playing the role I do now for the organization. So I just got free tickets to a play and decided to bring some friends. And we walked in there. For all we knew, we could have been walking into South Pacific. I didn't know that it was going to be real combat, actual blasts, actual recordings of what happened on 9/11. The real stuff that we heard on the radio and all of that. And then a story. And they took me in to meet Scott, and he was in his BDUs. And he introduced himself and said that he plays the role of Danny, who gets killed in Afghanistan. That moment, I'll never forget that moment, because that was my Danny was killed in Afghanistan. And he realized, he said this years later now, that he realized when he said it like that, oh my goodness. Oh no. But it was amazing. I mean, I was sucked right in. I never knew what combat was really like. I did not know. I had no idea what my son was exposed to and dealt with. And like just watching your opening and hearing those recordings, it goes through me. But it's important. It's important. I don't shy from that at all. I felt like it was a gift to me to get a sense of what my son's life was like at the end. And the play itself also shows the family. So it shows what's going on in Afghanistan, what's going on at home, and how the protagonist goes back and forth from the war home, back to Afghanistan and home. And that's exactly what happened to so many of our veterans for years and years and years. And so it was so powerful. I felt so validated for the first time. And at that point, it had been 9 years since my son was killed. And it was the first time I connected so closely with other veterans, combat veterans, who I felt understood my pain and cared about my pain. And it's not that others didn't. I know they did. It just somehow, this was a meeting that was meant to be. And within months, I was actively participating in things with the Hero's Journey, volunteering my time, going to events. And he started introducing me as his Gold Star ambassador, just out of the blue. I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of a cool title. And then and he was in the process, the Hero's Journey was in the process of developing their big goal is storytelling, teaching people the tools to how to do storytelling, how to find their voice, how to get their story out, and then how to do it in the service of others. Once the resolution is found, which comes with telling our story, it heals the mind and the heart, and it mends the soul, was the most recent words I heard our organization using, that I think is absolutely true. And when the pandemic hit, the play got shut down in 2020, and we did a film, and Gary Sinise saw the film and called Scott up, and this was in 2021 as things were kind of winding down from the pandemic. Maybe it was 20 yet or 2022. I don't know. And he said, we got to get it back on the road, and this time grander, bigger, and the play has gone through iterations. We're on our third now. Scott says he's had 106 rewrites. So, and now it's a 2.5-hour play with 6 cast members, and very powerful. And we started our year nationwide tour sponsored by Gary Sinise in January of 2023. And we'll be wrapping this year up, of course, in December, but we're already setting dates for 2024 and cities. And my role as the Gold Star Ambassador, and Gary Sinise added Liaison for Families of the Fallen, which I think is absolutely appropriate. We might even drop the Gold Star piece, because people get the impression they have to be Gold Star families or Gold Star mothers to be invited for, to the play and honored. And my job is to honor them, to introduce them to the cast, like I was, tell a little story about their fallen hero, and then take care of them that whole weekend, because it's an emotional play, and it exhilarated and invigorated my spirit. But some feel very triggered with the emotions and maybe hadn't worked through their emotions yet. So I'm there for them. And we also have another organization we work hand in hand with called Operation Angel Wing, and they are master trauma interventionists, and they are there if somebody's triggered to the point where they get stuck and get scared. So we take care of them. And in the meantime, in between play stops, we're doing these storytelling workshops, 2-day workshops for veterans, families of the fallen, and we've added first responders and their families to it now. So it's a wonderful opportunity for me. I feel it's currently my highest calling, the most important thing I could be doing at this point in my life, and honoring my son and his sacrifice.
It's truly amazing. And, we've spoke, a few times before, and I am always honored and humbled to be able to talk to anybody that wants to come on the podcast. But you had seen a different podcast that I was on, and reached out to me, and I was blown away, because my goal for anything that I do with Everlasting Veteran is to be able to reach as many people as possible, to help as many people as possible. And you do the same through your work, and it helps the community of military members, veterans, Gold Star families come together, and build that community up. If you didn't reach out to me, I would not know that you existed, your son's story. And coincidentally, him and I were both in Afghanistan at the exact same time, operating in the same area. And it speaks volumes to me when somebody wants to be able to tell their story. And we'll get a little bit more into that as we go, but it really truly helps other people more than we even know. There's so many people that, have emailed me. You've helped me understand my son more, my daughter more, and be able to have those hard conversations that you just don't have the words for, when you have a better understanding of what military personnel have gone through being deployed in a combat zone. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play a tribute video, and I am truly humbled and honored to be able to piece this together to give you a little insight into who Daniel Johnson truly was. All right. It is an honor.
Good thing I had these handy.
And it is a privilege to have you on, to be able to honor your son, Gold Star families, yourself. And, it's one of those things, it's emotional for any veteran. Any veteran that's lost anybody, any veteran that knows somebody that has lost somebody, especially if they've been to Iraq or Afghanistan or any combat scenario. It is a tough topic. It's up there with any other tough topic that comes along with anything having to do with military, even going into the realm with first responders and what first responders go through as well. And the families in blue. It truly is humbling to be able to have you on, to be able to honor Daniel. And I just want to say thank you.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk and tell stories about my beloved son. It's, as I said in the beginning, storytelling is healing. Every time we tell our stories, another piece of our heart is healed. And in a case like mine, the healing will never be complete in this world. I'll never not be heartbroken over his early death at 23, way too young. But I've discovered an amazing healing and peace in my soul. And it's come through storytelling, and in the process of that, we discover more things about our experience and our life. And it's an amazing gift that we have to be able to tell our story. So thank you, Ryan, for giving me this privilege today.
Absolutely. I appreciate you. And so I kind of want to dive a little bit into it to be able to help other families as well. I had an episode that I put out in season 1 called The Knock That Gave Them Wings. And that was kind of a two-piece, two-sided thought, which I spent many hours going back and forth of what to say, how to say it. And It had to do with military. It had to do with first responders. You know, a lot of people have not figured out sometimes how to grieve or how to move forward. And if you would, kind of go into, and I'm sure you remember it to the minute when you got that knock on the door and what you were going through.
My story's a little different than most families of active duty, killed in action. We never got the knock on the door. Little mistake, little slip up from the military. We were driving down the interstate. We'd been on the highway for about 8 to 9 hours at that point, driving home from northern Minnesota down to southern Wisconsin. And it was getting dark. And we had turned our phones off for it was a beautiful, it was actually an amazing day. And I've learned a lot about appreciating the good when it's there at the moment, being in the moment from my experience with my loss with Daniel. We were driving down because we were in northern Minnesota for the birth of our first granddaughter, which was a thrilling, wonderful time. And it was with my oldest son's daughter was born, and we were all in the hospital room, and Danny called that night and got to hear his baby niece cry. And so it was a pretty exciting, wonderful weekend. And we were driving home on a Tuesday after the long weekend. And we turned our phones off so that we could just enjoy the drive, this beautiful autumn day, sunny day. And when it started getting a little dark and we were still probably 3 hours out, my husband wanted to check his voicemail for work. So I checked my phone and I saw that my oldest son had called about 10 times and left no messages. So I panicked thinking it was the baby. And I called him right back and he said, "Where are you?" And I said, we're still in the car. And he said, "Where are you? How close are you to home?" And we told him we were like 3 hours from home. So he said, "Pull over and call Dad." Now, my husband, I'm no longer married to Danny's father. And I was so clueless, I was just so excited about this new baby. And he was on his way up to see the baby. I thought, well, maybe he just wanted to share that moment with us. So I called him up, and I now know he was there with them. And when he answered the phone, he didn't say anything. And I could hear him crying. And all he could get out was, "We've lost Danny." And we weren't even pulled over yet, because I just didn't think that we needed to pull over for that kind of what I expected the call. So it was a pretty traumatic. And we were still 3 hours away from home on the interstate. We did pull over. I will never forget everything that occurred in that moment. And although I don't remember what my husband does, that he said that the scream he heard out of me was nothing he'd ever heard before from anyone ever, anytime. I have no memory of that, but I do remember him. I remember going into this mode of, okay, he said we lost Danny. So, you get on that, okay, he's lost. He's missing in action. They can find them. It's not like it used to be in Vietnam days or World War II. They'll find him. He's just missing. So we started calling everybody we knew and said to pray that they find Danny. He's missing. He's lost. That's one of the crazy things that happens to you. You go into this denial. It didn't really happen, and this is what really happened. That was much easier to handle. But of course, as the night wore on, it became very clear that they never lost him. They knew right where he was, and I went through kind of I would say a blackout, not from drinking, but from trauma. I don't remember much about those early days. I know we flew out to California with the whole family. Have no memory of that flight. My first memory of California was we were in the back seat of a black Humvee with two officers, or in the front, dressed in their dress blues, and we pulled up into a hotel parking lot. It happened to be the hotel we were at 4 months before, to the week. Danny had been married 4 months before, to the day he was killed. So they brought us back to that same hotel, and I snapped out of this blackout. I remember what kind of almost like waking up in this black Humvee or whatever it was, big SUV, whatever, and seeing that hotel I had just been at 4 months before with a big banner that said, "Our American Hero," and my son's picture. That kind of brought me back for a while. So I was in and out of memories of our time in California, where he'd been stationed, and his first service was there.
Yeah, it's a tough topic to bring up, let alone talk about sometimes. And you are courageous to be able to be here and also do what you do with the hero's journey. And you've definitely have helped more people than you know. And I truly think that, we have this saying in the military that a warrior dies two deaths. The first one when they're actually killed, and the second when you don't say their name. And we say that because we always want to hold on to the memories. We always want to be able to honor them, and especially with the military of providing the ultimate sacrifice, because a lot of people don't understand, when you join the military, you're signing a blank check to the government, and it's up until, the loss of possibly your life. And there is so many families that unfortunately have had to go through that with the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, Vietnam, World War II, any conflict that we've gone through as a country. It has more of a trickle down effect than anybody will ever know, from mothers and fathers to sisters and brothers, cousins, aunts, uncles, friends, and other family members. Um, and everybody remembers that warrior in a different way. And it's important to be able to hear everybody's perspective of, what they remember about the person, because there may be a memory that they remember that you just don't. And you go, "Oh my God, I can't believe I forgot about that." And it brings such joy, but also sadness at the same time, because you remember that moment again, and I always believe that telling your story, telling other people's stories, when they're no longer with us, is healing in itself. Um, and we talked before, and I'm just going to put a picture up because this is a pretty cool picture. And this is of Daniel rock climbing in his EOD bomb suit. And you told me that he was an avid rock climber along with his brothers. And I never met him. But just some of the pictures you sent me, some of the stuff that I've found, he seemed like, the serious but goofball at the same time. Somebody that I could see myself hanging around with. And it like I've said before, I can't say it enough. It is truly an honor to be able to represent him, his memory, and that's a great picture as well.
Yeah.
You know, so kind of
Can I
go ahead.
I was just going to touch on a couple of things that you said that I always like to share with other, especially newly bereaved moms and families, and that has to do with these stories and memories that you were talking about. And one of the things that I realized, and uh, I think the reason I have traveled well through my grief is the best way I can word it, is because I realized early, like within weeks, that I needed to collect stories about Dan from other people in the family, especially. It started with the family because we had these new babies. We had two grandchildren now, two little babies, a grandson and a granddaughter. Under the oldest one was 6 months old at that point. And when I came to this, maybe only 5 months, and I thought they'll never know their Uncle Dan. So I want to start getting stories from the family. And then I reached out. Then I realized, well, I was getting stories not only that maybe I had forgotten, like you mentioned, but I was also getting stories I never heard, things that happened between the boys. He had three brothers and three sisters. So there were some really hilarious and disturbing to a mother stories, but it was like such a treat to hear those things because and what that taught me right away too is that getting stories from other people, stories I don't know yet, I get to have new memories again. And that's one of the biggest pains that a mom feels early on, and anyone. I can only speak as a mom, but I know everyone, when you lose a beloved person in your life, you're not going to get any more memories from their lives. So if you ask people to tell you stories about them, things they remember, then you have a new memory. And so I started assigning his siblings every Christmas to come to the table with a new memory that they hadn't told me yet. And if they ran out and had to tell me one over, that's okay, But that was how I think I started my healthy grieving. I wasn't afraid. I'll tell you, I wasn't afraid to cry. And that sounds silly, but a lot of people are afraid. And I have even been told that there's a fear that you'll never stop. If I let myself cry, I'm never going to stop. And then I open the door for them to come to that and say, you will. You will. I'm living proof. You will stop. It'll come back, as you saw this morning already. I mean, the tears are never far from my eyes. But I also assure people, don't be afraid of those tears. They don't hurt any. You don't. It's a paradox that we are afraid to let those tears flow, that we think it's going to hurt worse, when in reality, it always, some bizarre way, feels better. They're like a bath for the soul or something, they feel right because you're in such terrible pain. It's natural. And I look at grief as a gift to help us to mourn and to move through the tragedy. It never goes away. The pain never goes away, but you learn to live with it and you learn to find hope and meaning and purpose if you let yourself grieve and walk with that grief.
Thank you for that. It's one of those things that, a lot of people sometimes just need to hear those words of, how do I, you know, get past, this wall that's in front of me. And I truly believe that, like I said before, when others, can connect with each other, and be able to, give sound advice on, how to do something, or even just hear, a connection of this person went through this and this is how they handled it. It gives hope again into a world that may seem completely damaged and unrepairable.
It will never be the same, I assure them, because people will ask me, will it ever be like it was? And they know it won't. They know that. And they just need to hear it won't, and that's okay. You will find different reasons to experience joy. And you find, and again, I'm talking now almost 13 years since Dan's death. So my perspective is a little different. It's been a journey. I couldn't say all these things for the first 5 years. It's not a immediate process, but you do find, I do remember, and it was maybe only a couple of years after, I remember the first time I consciously realized that my joy now is actually brighter than it was before. My appreciation for what remains, I think, is why, it's so much greater. And that first year, I felt like the world was black and white. It'll never be colorful again, and it will never make sense again. Everything I thought I believed in, I was wrong. All of those things, you when your world literally explodes and it's shattered, and comes down in pieces. It'll never be what it was, what you thought. And then you get to realize, well, that's what I thought it was. It never really was that. That hurts. That's over. But to not be afraid to go through that process and doing it, then all of a sudden I realized when the color came back into my world, it was more vivid. And the love I felt for my family and friends was more fierce than ever, which makes sense. And that's a good thing. These are all good things that can come from the most tragic experience in life, and that's losing your loved one. And for a mom, there's not a more tragic loss than your child. But even that, you can find good things. And I feel, like I said, that I'm compelled now to be there for other mothers. And more recently, I mean, initially it was all about being there for other mothers. Then it was about being there for the families. And now, more recently, I'm realizing I want to be there for those warriors who did come home, but are missing chunks of their heart that got left on the battlefield. And the mothers of those warriors who were in so much pain, they came home, their bodies came home, but their spirits didn't, and they couldn't stand another day of it. And that's another reason I mentioned earlier about dropping the gold star ambassador from my title, because now we are encountering more and more families who've lost their warriors from suicide, died from suicide, from the post-traumatic stress, from the survivor's guilt. And they, and we bring them to the play and to the workshops too, and honor them and honor their heroes. They're heroes, just like you said earlier, that when you take that oath, you sign that check. They did too, and they died because, for the same reasons. I mean, I don't know how to say that, but they died because they served, and it cost them their lives. Not the same way that it cost my Danny his life, but it still cost them their lives, and they fought because they loved. And so we're seeing more and more and more of that. And so now my calling too is to be there for those warriors who are coming home, and after all that's happened in the last 2 years with the disastrous pullout and how that's affected so many of our veterans. I am there for them when I can be. And this past week, I was able to speak to the Hennepin County veterans in Minneapolis the day after 9/11, and share with them some insights that I have gained as a Gold Star mom that I know helps them deal with that survivor's guilt.
Yeah, and I've talked about it with many other people before. There is a sense of purpose that's lost when you get out. There's a sense of drive, will, ambition, many different feelings when you get out of the military, um, that you feel that you can't connect like you did with the same people. Because to be honest, a lot of people, and the majority of my military time was overseas. My duty station was overseas. I deployed while I was overseas, um, to Afghanistan. So for, 4.5 years, I was not in the United States. So there's an extreme disconnect from the rest of the world when you serve. And you know part of the transition that I'm trying, to get information out to other people that are transitioning or have transitioned out of the military into the civilian world and became a veteran, is that you're a changed person. um you have the ability to be able to say, I accept who I am now, and reintroduce yourself as that changed person to the people that or meet for the first time, because you're not going to be that same person before you joined. And it's very important. It took me many years to be able to comprehend and actually accept that I'm not the same person that I was, in 2008 going into 2009, when I joined the military. And, for me and like many other, veterans that have, got out of the military and then went into, the police force, my transition, I only had pretty much like kind of a 7-month break between getting out of active duty and then going into policing, which I've done since 2013. And taking one uniform off and putting on another, because a lot of times we have that sense of service that just doesn't go away. And we're trying to fill a hole in a sense, that it seems like every time we, put something in there, it is at the same level as when we first started. um so a lot of people have to understand that, whether if you're a veteran, first responder, gold star family member, blue star family member, there is going to be times where things don't seem complete. There's going to be times that you're going to feel lost even years later. You're going to have that sense of, what do I do today? I'm going through what I felt a little bit, years prior. And the big important thing is, I believe, is to find something that gives you that temporary short purpose, and kind of put it to the side when you have those moments. Because purpose driven things, that's why service dogs are so great for veterans, first responders, or anybody that has a service dog, because it gives you a sense of purpose. You have to care for the dog, you have to care for its needs, and in turn, you regain a little bit of purpose. And that's why, like, with Everlasting Veteran, we're fortunate enough, my brother-in-law, who is a Marine Corps veteran and a dog breeder, with Rockin' Frenchies in Myrtle Beach, have partnered up with this mission of getting out as many service dogs as possible, to veterans and or first responders. I tell you right now, when I first got back, so I was, essentially unemployed for 7 months before I got hired with the police department. And the dog that we had at the time was pretty much going everywhere with me, like everywhere. Home Depot, it didn't matter where I was going. I'd run down to get a coffee. She'd jump in the truck. I'd go for a run. She'd come with me. And it didn't matter. Like, she did not leave my side. And years later, I didn't, kind of comprehend the fact that, dogs really sense, what you're going through. And, I realize now that, she, just knew I can't leave his side. And it helped me. And then when she passed, I was for a good year, um, you know, missing something, and ended up getting, a lab, which I've had for the last 9 years. And it just shows that, dogs are that, they call it the man's best friend. They have that sense, and that's why they're so great when, you can't pick up the pieces yourself or nobody can do it for you. There's just that little special something that comes from, the dog being there in your presence that helps you through it. And that's why with Everlasting Veteran and Rockin' Frenchies, we've teamed up for that mission. Now, I do have a, I guess it's question, but at the same time, more of advice for anybody that is going through, whether it be years later, what has helped you when you do have, those moments, in life, and you have a vivid memory that kind of stops you in your tracks. What has helped you, get through the day?
That's a great one because that will consistently happen for me. I know the rest of my life. I call them tsunamis. They'll just out of nowhere, bam, I'll be driving in the driveway and all of a sudden I'll realize my son was killed. My son was killed. He's, it's just like, what? Like how did, and not that I never forget it. Of course I don't, but just that hits you so hard. Or, um, the other day, there's a short video that the Hero's Journey is using to promote the play, and it has a moment last January when they honored Danny at Steppenwolf, Gary Sinise's theater, and had the man from Fight for Fighting, John Ondrasik, was there, and he played the song, which was his song and was famous. He made famous back in the day, called 100 Years, that Danny and I danced to at his wedding. And he played that for me up on the stage with me, with him. And they put together this video as following that, where they had spliced in, had a double screen and the video of Danny and I dancing at his wedding. And every time I happened to watch that the other day because I was sending it to somebody, and just knocked me off, my self. Yeah. And my what I do and what I've always done, because I feel like I don't have a choice, but I know people do have a choice, and sometimes they don't. They make the choice not to let themselves feel it. They shut it down. And I know soldiers are taught that. Warriors are taught, when you're in the midst of it, like if you're overseas and you're in combat and something comes up, you shove that down. You cannot deal with that. And you guys get pretty skilled at that. And that's to your disadvantage when you're back here and the war's not here anymore on the outside, but you have it on the inside because you guys don't know how to. But I'm not good at that. So it's not hard for me to just, put things aside, because nothing in this world let me just emphasize that and repeat it. Nothing in this world is more important than your mental and spiritual health. Because if you don't have that, it doesn't matter if there's a crisis at work or if there's a phone call and somebody needs you. It doesn't matter if you aren't healthy and you can't be there for them. So when that hits me, when that tsunami comes, I let it wash over me. I cry, I feel it. And when I feel the calmness, because those emotions, those intense emotions, we share this in our storytelling workshops for people. When you feel that coming when you're speaking, there are some physical tricks you can do. If you're on stage and you're giving an inspirational talk and you feel it welling up, there are some physical things you can do. You can swallow, you can let out your breath, you can step to the side, and that'll sometimes dissipate it. But if it doesn't, it's not going to last more than 90 seconds. It's just an emotion. Maybe if you're at home and you're going through what I did the other day, you might want to take a half an hour or more to just let those tears flow and to really, really feel it. But then the next thing after that is, and you mentioned this, is to get into your service. Whatever it is, do something for someone else. It'll take you into a more meaningful, purposeful place in your life. And the kind of irony here is how I learned that from Danny. His freshman year of college, his girlfriend broke up with him, and it was his first breakup, which I'm chuckling at. There he is smiling, and actually she took that picture. It's one of my favorites of him because he was so proud and he was trying not to look proud. But when you go through that first breakup and you're like 19, oh, it's terribly painful. And he suffered. He would call me and just cry, and came home and cried. And my gut instinct, and I don't think I gave it a lot of forethought. Wasn't a philosophy, wasn't like pontificating like I tend to do now. It just was my gut instinct. I said, you got to do something for someone else. Get involved in volunteering. That will help take your mind off this so it doesn't consume you. He immediately went to the Red Cross. This was right when Katrina had happened. And he signed up and said, let me go do whatever I can do. And it really got him out of that cycle he was in. And here I was, all these, not that many years later, to be honest. It was only about 4 years later that he was killed. And once I could breathe again and focus and came out of that fog, I knew from him that was what I needed to do. And that's been the most wonderful thing in my life as an older adult. I have to say, this work I do, we travel the nation. We're in a different city every month. And in between the shows, we're doing workshops. So I have to admit, at my age, it's exhausting, physically exhausting. I will come home from some trips and sleep for a day or 2 days or more. And it wipes me out physically. But emotionally, mentally, spiritually, it is exhilarating and inspirational. I learn from these people that I'm supposed to be helping. I hear their stories and I'm moved and touched, and then I see how they can help other people. And there's just nothing greater I could be doing with my time in my life now. And it's a time of joy. It's become a real time of joy for me.
Yeah. And I did, when you reached out to me, I did some like research, looked it up, obviously. And, I looked, and I saw that, it's truly an amazing gift that everybody involved is giving to everybody when you go to each city, and be able to, and you talked about, preferring to have more intimate settings so that way, it's not this grandioso, theater, where you can create those connections with the audience members and be able to, give them that journey, that they have the feeling of what you're presenting to them. And it's truly amazing. I do have a question. What is going on in this picture?
Well, in the top one, Danny's on the right. If you're looking at the picture, that's his little brother, Eric, who, by the way, enlisted in the Army 3 years after Danny was killed. He waited. So it wasn't a knee-jerk emotional reaction. It was a decision made with much reflection and prayer. But so that picture is precious to me because I always picture, and when Eric was in that, Danny had his arm around him still, like he did when he was 4 and Eric was 2. But then 18 years later, the one below was actually Danny's wedding, and they were just goofing around taking pictures of him with each brother. And there's funny ones with his other brothers too, but this was just too much to not put together with the picture of the two of them. So Danny's on the left in the bottom one,
Yeah.
picking on his little brother who's now taller than him. And you can see how much it upsets Eric. He's like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, get your hand off me.
Yeah, you're not hurting me anymore. I can beat you now.
Yeah.
Um,
You sent me
oh,
as well too. I mean, it's some of the photos you sent me is absolutely amazing. It just shows the connection, they had with each other. And even this one,
that was
um,
our first Christmas after Danny was gone. Our first Christmas without him. Um, so where I only have 3 sons now, and so that was just a um, funny picture, but I love it because I
yeah,
felt them, yeah, so
yeah.
surrounding me.
I'm going to bring that up again because size comparison. These are 3 large men.
Yeah.
Um, your legs probably fell asleep, I'm assuming. And they probably acted like after the picture was taken, got comfortable and didn't let you get off the couch.
Oh yeah, no. Peter jumped on me. That was my oldest who was lounging across. He just jumped on it at the last minute. We were going to have him sit in front of me, and it was going to be this real formal picture of mom and sons on Christmas,
Yeah,
and it just fell apart when he jumped on us, and it all became a joke. But it was real. It was
yeah,
very much the
yeah. It's a
real
very
thing.
candid photo for sure.
And I just want to say that one of Daniel hugging Eric, where you see Eric's face and the back of Daniel's head, that was the last picture of them ever taken, of just the two of them. That was at Danny's wedding, which was, he was deployed within 6 weeks after the wedding. And so we were only there in California for another, 48 hours. That was the last picture. And it just, to me, was so poignant that it's Daniel's leaving. It's the back of his head, and Eric's still here with us.
Yeah, yeah. The photos that you sent, and I actually was able to grab like some other ones that you didn't send me. Of deployment.
Mm,
Um, and
yeah.
I mean, it just goes to show like the spiritual individual, that he was, and no matter what, there's obviously the serious side, but at the same time, um, you had that goofball side, you know, um, like this photo. I mean, and who climbs a rock wall in a bomb suit?
Bomb suit.
You know, who
100-pound bomb suit.
who does it? Who does that? Um, I do have another photo, just for the storytelling purposes of, when was
Yeah.
this?
That was the day of he graduated from basic. And I just have to say a little piece about that day. That's him and me, by the way, even though I look a little different, because that was in 2007, a long time ago. And that's at Lackland Air Force Base. And we got there just in time for this, the ceremony. We ran to the bleachers, where there's thousands of graduates, and we couldn't see them. And everybody afterwards, goes down and gets together and finds their airmen. And we couldn't find Daniel. And it turned out we spent until about 8:15 before we found him that night. I say we, my husband and I, his former girlfriend, another friend from high school, other, high school friends were there, and we all split up. And I'd never been on a base before. I knew nothing about how to get around. But we had our phones, and we ran around the base and spent hours trying to find him. At 8:15, I found him in the store. He was standing there. He saw me, and I was afraid he might not have graduated. He would write me letters during that basic training, which I'm sure you did, about how hard it was. And I don't know if I'm going to make it. And oh, pray for me. And oh, keep me in your mind and your thoughts and your heart, all those letters and hopes. And so I was really scared that maybe he didn't make it. And then all of a sudden I was at that store looking for him. And there he was in his uniform, looking so great. And we ran together. Turned out he was in the top 10%. So he was at a totally different ceremony. And because he didn't have his phone, they didn't let us know. So he was standing at the doorway at this inside ceremony, watching for us to walk out. And I still picture that day. I see him like that, like a little 10-year-old behind a curtain, waiting to see if mom and dad are coming to the pageant, and we missed it, but I'll tell you what happened that night. We only had 15 minutes, and I got on my phone. I called everybody, hurry, here we are. And we had a total then of like 10 minutes with everybody before he had to be back in his barrack. And we were in it was like a mall area inside this building, and the eating food court was all shut down and roped off. But I said, it was dark. I said, why don't we sit? I wanted to sit down with him for a few minutes. Let's just sit there. And he goes, no, that's closed, Mom. And I said, well, we're not. It's okay. We're just going to sit there for 10 minutes. He goes, no, that's not good integrity. I'm like, what happened to my son? And or am I that bad of a mom? And he said, no, but he started talking to me then about after all he'd been through, what integrity and commitment meant to him. I'll never forget the transformation that I know other mothers see in their sons and daughters after basic. It's astounding.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's one of those things I've talked about before, is even just basic training and AIT, where you go and learn your job skill. Even just going through that, you are now a changed person. You forever will not be the same person before completely. You may, still have characteristics and traits and stuff like that. But then you also add on like deployments. And I have some guys that I served with that are still in, and continue to deploy, year after year. And you have guys that, they end up with a 20-year career with, 10, plus years of deployments. And I think that, a lot of people, and this is why transition, is something that I kind of harp on, and try to help with, for anybody that's, military, first responder, stuff like that. When you go through any type of career in which you're subjected to, stuff the entire world normally does not see, it changes you and makes you a different person. And when you get out and you try to be the same person that you were before you started, you're going to have that sense of identity has been lost. And you try to reclaim, or find a new identity. And there's many different pieces to transition, and it's different for everybody. And that's something we can talk about at a different time. But it's very important, even with Gold Star and Blue Star families. I believe it's similar in nature, when somebody disconnects from the military or somebody loses a loved one, you're never the same person again. And, going through life thinking that you're going to all of a sudden be the same person again, is a lie to yourself. And acceptance is probably one of the hardest things that we go through, is accepting the changed person that we are, because we don't want to accept that it happened, or
Right.
what we went through was real. And I can relate in that aspect. I do have, two older step boys, but I can relate in that aspect of, going through life after the military. um it becomes one of those things that isn't talked about enough. And if we do talk about it more, it can help other people be able to get through those challenges in life.
Yes, and you don't. I think one of the things that strike me when you were just talking, you're right. You'll never be the same. You will never be the same. But you don't have to be worse. You could be better if you aren't afraid to take the lessons that grief will teach you. You could end up feeling like there's more purpose and more meaning in your life than perhaps there was before the tragedy. Another thing I just wanted to make sure I touched on today too, just getting back to the play Last Out real quickly. We've talked so much about the veterans and the family members, but it's also for civilians. And if anyone's hearing this and knows where, when we're in your city or something like that, we encourage. Of course, probably a lot of people that are watching this are veterans or family members, but I do encourage everybody to invite their neighbors and their friends who, like you said, you come back from war a different person and you try to reconnect. There's actually a great country song by Daryl Worley, I Just Came Back from War. And he lands and he talks about going out with his buddies to the places they used to go out to, and how finally somebody in his group gets just wasted enough to say out loud, "You're not the same as you used to be." And then he says, "I just came back from war. I'll never be the same." And it's so true. And it's the same for those of us who lost our loved ones and in on the battlefield. I'll never be the same person, but I feel like I've improved in my love for people and my appreciation and gratitude. And I think that that is there for everyone. And so anyway, getting back to what I wanted to say about the play is what's great about it for civilians and those friends who maybe didn't go to war to come and sit there and feel that. And I call the play, it's not entertainment. There are a lot of funny scenes. Like you said, there's camaraderie, there's brotherhood, and the first half of the play is hilarious. You laugh a lot. Second half, you cry a lot. But in between, there is explosions and recordings from 9/11, and there's we have a real bagpiper. We have, it's very real. You are immersed in the whole experience, and that includes combat. And I know that is extremely powerful for for civilians. And it was for me as a civilian. I had never been in the military or had any real connection other than my father, and he didn't talk about it. He didn't say a word. And he did deal with it in very negative ways. And so I had a bad attitude toward military before my experience with Daniel. And even though the worst thing that could happen happened, it was still the best. He had a very positive experience of growth and purpose in his life from the military. So it's really helpful, I think, for friends and neighbors and family members to sit shoulder to shoulder with us in the theater and experience this. They come out. Well, I told you the first time I went, I brought friends. They were some high school friends because I had just been at a high school reunion, and I invited them to join me for a matinee, for a play, had some military thing. They had no clue. And we walked out afterwards, and we're in the parking lot, and one of the guys with me who I'd known since like second grade, total silence. Nobody was saying a word. And he finally broke the ice. He said, I don't know about you guys, but I'll never be the same. And that's how I felt too. And everybody feels pretty much after this, after knowing more. And I think it helps our veterans and our first responders. So many of them are veterans too, like
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've talked to, many first responders that are veterans as well. We share a different connection, even if they're not a first responder. Veterans share a different connection. It doesn't matter if we served together, served at the same time. The sense of service, knowing that you're surrounded or nearby another veteran, the conversation starts like you've been friends forever. The conversation ends, and you actually become friends and you stay connected. And even when you get together or talk to a veteran that you served with, I just spoke to a guy that I served with when I was in Germany 2 days ago, and it's like we never left off, and up until that point, it was probably, I don't know, maybe 5-6 years since I had talked to him. But it was like we just left right off where we did when I left Germany and got out of the military. And that's just a testament to the connection, the bond, the brotherhood, and everything that the military embodies with the connections with service members.
And that makes me think too about how to that was something I wanted to make sure that I shared with you, um, how important it is for us family members, particularly those of the fallen, mothers of, whether they died like mine in action or died because they couldn't handle the pain, the emotional pain any longer. It doesn't matter. But it maybe, in fact, maybe that, I don't know what that's like. I'm, to me, that's the only thing that could be worse than what I'm feeling right now, and will for the rest of my life, to know that my child's pain was that great. And what happens, I can say, for me, was when Danny died, I felt this complete disconnection from the military. They were just gone. I mean, they said, well, we're there for you. And yeah, they did a lot of wonderful things, but we live in Wisconsin. There's no any Air Force base here. And and even if there was, I mean, that happens to the family and to spouses, they're disconnected then. And, but when we do get reconnected on occasion with veterans, it's not like what you experienced, but it's on a different level for us. There's a special connection. Even if they didn't know Danny, like for me with you, you never met Danny. And I talk to a lot of veterans now. It doesn't matter. There's that something special I feel from you. And I want to share this because something that had happened for me. One of the army, Canadian Army soldier, because Danny's unit was attached to the Canadian Army on the mission that he was on when he was killed. And one of the Canadian soldiers they'd become good friends. And he had actually told his brothers about this guy. His name was Tim, and how he was from, obviously, I said Canadian soldier. And my boys were all born up in northern Minnesota, right on the border, like just below Quetico Provincial Park. And so he had this affinity for the Canadian Army, like, oh, they're my buddies, and which they were. And this one guy was going to come after the war. They had plans to get together and meet his brothers and do all the hunting and fishing and stuff. And that, of course, didn't happen. But 7 years after Danny was killed, that soldier called me. It took him 7 years. And the first thing he said, and this is something each one had said before, if my calling you hurts you anymore or upsets you, I will hang up and go away and never bother you again. And I immediately, in every case, no, don't go anywhere. First of all, there's nothing you could do or say that could hurt me more. Nothing. And and talking about it, there's nothing you could describe I haven't imagined, and probably worse. So the odds are you're going to bring a comfort about what didn't happen to my son. And definitely, it's not odds, but it's a definite that I get a comfort. I call it a strange comfort, hearing from these men who cared about my son and were there when he left this world. And I just have to tell this story. It actually starts, it ties in with this soldier. So I'm not going off on a tangent, even though it might sound like it. But the story starts when Danny was 16. Before he ever even talked about the military, he spent a summer in Europe with a drama group, and it was a mission trip. He was, though he was a gregarious athlete in high school, he was also drawn to the arts and particularly drama. And he was very dedicated to his faith. And he found drama to be a really good medium for him to share God's love and God's love for everyone, his love for God and God's love. So that was his big thing that summer when he was 16, was in Europe. He came home and he brought me a gift. And you have the picture of it, and you showed it in it's this mug. And when I was opening the gift up, he said, Mom, it's a second. It's imperfect. I'm like, you didn't have to tell me that. There it is. And he said, yeah. He said, I got to tell you. I said, no, you don't got to tell me. I would never have noticed. And I just see it as a beautiful cup. And he goes, but now the reason I got to tell you is because the minute I saw it, I thought of you. And he was in a crockery shop in Scotland, and really not in there looking for a gift for me. I don't know what he said he wasn't initially, but he saw that and he thought of me, and he had to have it. It was the only one on the shelf, so he was paying for it. And they told him, oh, this is a second. We'll see if we've got about any more in the back. Well, they didn't. It was the last one they had, and he knew it was for me, so he bought it anyway. And he said to me, he was 16, sorry, Mom, it's a second. But I'm like, all I ever saw was this beautiful gift that my Danny wanted me to have. And 7 years later, he was killed. And that mug became cherished, my most cherished possession from him. And I wouldn't let anyone else. I used to share it, with the family, but nope. After he was killed, nobody else could drink out of it but me. It was all mine. I wouldn't even let anyone wash it and dry it and put it away because I was afraid they'd break it. Fast forward to 2017, I drop it. In October of 2017, he'd been gone 7 years then. And I'd had that mug for 14 years. And I dropped it and broke it in half. And it was a clean break. I thought, okay, I'm going to glue this back together and make it into a planner. And until then, I put it, like that, and set it on my night bed stand so that it would be close to me. And then a month later, I was reading the biography about John McCrae, Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae, who was a Canadian Army surgeon in World War I. He's also a poet, and he's the poet who wrote the poem In Flanders Fields, which is in Belgium, a battlefield that was actually used a lot in World War I, and there were a lot of buried, fallen soldiers in Flanders Fields. And he, in 1915, took note, after he had buried one of his closest friends who had enlisted with him. He took note that in between those crosses and on the graves, there was wildflowers growing, but most predominantly they were poppies. And that poem in Flanders Fields talks about, in Flanders Fields, the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row, that marks our place. And I could tell you the whole poem, but I won't. But by 1920s, that poem it took a while in those days. By the 20s, it became viral and worldwide. And by then, poppies represented the death of a warrior on a battlefield. And so all over the world, mostly like Great Britain and Canada and our country, but all of the places that were British ruled, people were wearing poppies when they lost a loved one. And so I was reading this book, and I read that he was born. I got to the point where he was born in Guelph, Ontario, when I got a phone call. That was that phone call from that Canadian soldier 7 years after Danny had been killed. And we talked, and I invited him to now join us like Danny had, and meet his brothers and come to the whole family gets together up in northern Minnesota. And we're a crowd now, 19, with all the grandkids and spouses. And so he was enthusiastic. And before we hung up, I said, by the way, where in Canada are you from? And he said, oh, a place called Guelph, Ontario. Now, I don't know about you, but I was like, what are the odds? I told him I'd never heard of it. And Canada's huge. And I said, are you familiar with John And I didn't even get Cray out. And he goes, oh, yeah. We've got his statue in our town square. We all know about it in Flanders Fields. And I said, well, that is such a coincidence. Yeah. And we hung up, and I ran up to my room because it was 14 years I'd been looking at that cup and not consciously realized that this red flower is a poppy.
Yep.
And something happened in my soul when that came together for me. I knew without a shadow of a doubt, that confirmed that Danny was always going to die on a battlefield. And that's why when he saw that cup at 16, Mom, I got to get this for my mom. I don't care if it's a second. I got to get it, and it was a gift, because until that point, I still struggled with, maybe he'll call. Maybe he's on a mission somewhere. Maybe, maybe he's at the CIA, whisked him off to Guatemala. I had, maybe. And at that moment, I knew I'm not going to get that call, because that was his destiny. And this is going to sound weird, but I also felt peace at that moment, a peace that I hadn't had, that I cannot describe, that it doesn't hurt any less. The peace doesn't take away the pain, as odd as that sounds, but it's a peace that my son accomplished his destiny. And when Tim finally joined our family at a gathering, the first night we were all together, and all every spouses, grandkids, I wandered off to bed, and it ended up being just my sons and Tim and me late at night talking about Danny and stories of growing up and funny stories. And then pretty soon they got to be more moving and poignant. And finally, Tim opened up and he said, that's those 7 years I didn't call you because I was in a dark place when I left Afghanistan. I was the combat engineer that was supposed to find that IED that Danny stepped on. And I saw his body fly through the air. And I got home, and the only way I could think of dealing with that pain was to take substances. So he became addicted to heroin, and that didn't work, didn't take away those nightmares and those flashbacks and seeing what happened to Danny. And so he attempted suicide several times and was in hospital several times. Finally went through all the all the treatments, and no more nightmares, no more flashbacks, no more hyper startle reflex. That's when he felt like he could call me, when that was under control. No more substances, not even meds to go to sleep anymore. All good. He said, but joining you, it's reminded me the one thing I have not gotten past is every so often I ask myself if the wrong man came home. And because of this silly cup, which is now broken, this broken piece of pottery from Scotland, I could say with complete assurance, Tim, the right man came home. That was Daniel's destiny, not yours. Your destiny was to come home. And he started shaking and the tears flowed. And he said, for almost 8 years, family, friends, professionals, counselors, doctors, psychiatrists, nobody could convince me that the right man came home except Danny's mom. And I have taken that experience and I now believe that there is something I can say to other veterans, and I have, that when your brothers in arms die, are killed, they, as you said, they signed a check, they took that oath, they knew what they were doing. In fact, early on after Danny was killed, my husband said to me one day, he put himself in harm's way. And at first that upset me. I thought he was like making it sound like it was Danny's fault. And I said, what? And he said, no, he chose to put himself in harm's way to protect others. And so turns out that was his destiny, but it's not everyone's. It's not everyone's. And for those of you who've come home, who are struggling with false guilt, and calling it survivor's guilt, it's just false. It's lies. You were destined to come home and to find your meaning and purpose. It's going to be different than you ever thought, but it's there. And that's, and one other little added note about the piece that it was a second, half of the cup I noticed, and I didn't notice this until this summer, 20 years later, there's a flower on the inside of the cup, and it's not a poppy, and it has the Latin name. And I thought, well, there you go. It was probably supposed to be a poppy with the Latin name, not some blue flower that doesn't match. So I figured out that's what made it a second. I looked up that flower. The Latin name is agapanthus. So I looked that up, and it's Latin, the Latin term, but it's taken from two Greek words, agape, and then panthus is flower. And agape is a kind of love. And there's, like, in Greek, there's, many kinds, but some of them are, phileo is brotherly love, eros is romantic love, agape is godly love. It's boundless love. It's unconditional love. And for the first time, I just reread the definition. I'd known all that before, but I reread the definition, and the word sacrificial was in this definition.
Mm.
And that's why it was supposed to be a second. That's why that was so important, because that's what Danny did, and what our other warriors who've lost their buddies, maybe in their arms. Some of them died doing what they told them to do. And I have my good friend who's the retired Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann has 23 of these remembrance bracelets that he has for 23 men who died under his command. And he's often said, that's a heavy weight on my heart. And when I gave him that other half of my cup with the sacrificial flower and told him, it's not a heavy weight. It was a privilege. You were part of 23 men accomplishing their destiny. You didn't cause it. You couldn't have caused it. You couldn't have stopped it. So you have to let go of that weight and remember the sacrifice they wanted, that they chose to do. So that's really what I feel called to share a lot more of now, especially as our tsunami of mental health issues are coming down the pike with so many. And I really believe that suicide ideation comes from a lack of meaning and purpose, which comes from believing that it should have been you who died versus someone else. Misconceptions, misunderstandings.
Yeah. And a lot of people don't realize, and I've talked about it before, is that to roughly 200,000 veterans ETS get out of the military every year. And now that, we had the debacle pull out of Afghanistan, which at some point it needed to happen, but you have so many members getting out of the service at the same time, in the same year, and it overwhelms the system.
Yeah.
And it becomes unfortunate. I'm still 3 years later, still doing follow-up appointments for something that I started 3 years ago with the VA, and so it is a long process sometimes. And I actually just talked to a guy out of Louisiana. He's a veteran and works with a nonprofit down there, and he saw what I was doing, and wanted to reach out to me and get me connected with that nonprofit that he's a part of. And for him, like many other veterans, he said, he's like, I don't go to the VA because, I feel like, I'm, holding up the line for somebody
Mm.
else that needs it more. And, I'm not, privileged to receive this stuff because somebody else needs it more than I do, and, I told him, I said, I had the same exact feeling, and it took me years, and it took my wife, pretty much putting a foot in my butt to tell me, hey, get over there, uh get the help, get what you need done, and what you're doing right now is just not working, and I told him that, and he's like, you know what, I didn't even think about it that way. I said, it may take time, you know but once you get it done, there's that slight burden that's taken off of you, because you've used the services that are provided, that you're entitled to, based on serving.
You paid for it
Yeah.
in many ways.
And I know that we talked about before, changing the subject a little bit. I know that you said that Daniel would just completely be floored that
Mortified. He'd be
mor-
mortified.
mortified, that they have a memorial boulevard for him, and that's out in California.
Yes, that's at Vandenberg with Air Force Base, which is also now known as the Space Force Station or base, Space Force
Gotcha.
Base.
Yeah. It's one of those things that obviously when we're alive, we don't want to, pat ourselves on the back. We don't want attention towards us or anything like that. And, when they pay tribute, to any individual, it almost feels as though it's the least I could do. You don't know the words, you don't know how, you don't know, so when they pay, beautiful tributes to anybody that has paid the ultimate sacrifice and have left us, there's a lot of things that, memorial wise, for an individual, that they just don't know the words, they don't know what to do. And I mean, he's probably laughing right now, as I'm bringing that picture up, of like, why are you showing everybody, type of thing. But it's always a pleasure whenever we had some conversations, because little by little I'm slowly getting to know him, getting to know your family and connections and stuff like that. And it's such a beautiful thing. And that's why I love what I do with Everlasting Veteran. And I truly appreciate you coming on the show.
It's been an absolute pleasure for me. I feel extreme gratitude to be able to tell stories about Daniel. You quoted one of my favorites that I end one of my storytelling sessions with, always, about, it's actually, I know Ernest Hemingway was credited with this, but I've heard that it was an older, he paraphrased it. He supposedly took it from a Native American saying, I don't know where it started, but that every man dies twice. And the first time is when he takes his last breath and leaves this world. And the second time is the last time his name is spoken out loud. So it's a privilege for me to keep talking about Danny's life and say his name and tell stories about a young man whose heart was so compassionate. He chose a career that enabled him to save the lives of others by and whose heart was so courageous that he saved those lives disarming bombs at the risk and the ultimate sacrifice of his own. My hero and my son, Senior Airman Daniel James Johnson.
Well, Holly, I appreciate you, and I would absolutely love to have you on for another episode at some point, and talk some more. I've always had a pleasure having conversations with you, and we can continue this on another episode as well, if you have the time to do so. I know you got a busy schedule, traveling the country and doing amazing things with the hero's journey and last out and everything. And if everybody goes and looks that up, check them out.
Yeah.
Go to one of the times in which they have scheduled. It sounds like an amazing, absolutely amazing tribute to our military members.
We have a website that's lastoutplay.com. Simple to find, lastoutplay.com. And if you go to, tickets, it'll show you where the shows are. The rest of this year is there, but 2024 isn't yet. We only have 3 more shows, 3 more cities left. But the other thing to know is that for veterans and families of the fallen and first responders and their families, tickets are all funded. They're all paid for, no cost to veterans or families. So if you do it, make sure you click the box for veterans so that you're not charged, because you guys are our special guests and you're the people we want to honor the most at those productions and performances.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing with Gary Sinise and helping out with it. And he's always been a huge advocate for military members, family members of military veterans, first responders. Amazing individual, in himself as well, but also being able to assist in your journey with everything that you guys have going on. It's an absolute beautiful thing. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show. Anybody that is listening, please go check them out. And I will be putting up any dates and times in which Holly can provide to me on my website so you guys can know where they're at, when they're going to have those shows, be able to connect in a different way. Even if you were not in the military, everybody knows at least one veteran. Everybody knows at least somebody that's serving right now. And I think it will definitely help you better understand, be able to connect with the military member or veteran or first responder a little bit better, be able to have a better connection with that person. And don't forget to subscribe with Everlasting Veteran on YouTube, follow on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I really appreciate you coming on, Holly, and we will continue this conversation again soon.
Thanks.
Bulldog 3-3, patch 8 November, fire for effect, over. Enemy OP on hilltop, over.